Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a video on my current favourite completed science fiction and fantasy series of all time. Obviously this might change in the coming months and years, but as it currently stands, these series are tried and tested. They are series that I stand by, that I will reread, that I love, and that I will always recommend to my subscribers and to other readers. And these are in no particular order. They're all incredible. They all stand the test of time in my opinion. And with that in mind, let's start with the first one. The first one that I have on this list is the Daveofad Trilogy by S.F. Chakraborty. I love this series so much. Now this is a series where we're essentially following our main character as she journeys to a new world, as she tries to understand her powers in the context of a world full of politics and war and battle and machinations. It's just a really good, fun time. It's extraordinarily well written, especially book 2 onwards. And it's one of those books that truly transported me to another world. I've said this before, I'm not the sort of reader where I imagine every single scene in my head when I'm reading, but when I read this series, I felt like I was in Daveofad with these characters. I felt like I really got a good sense of what was happening. I felt like I really got a good sense of what this world looked like. There's such rich world building, from the smells, the food, the clothes, the buildings, the architecture, everything. It works perfectly. Book 1 is a slow start. There's a lot of journeying in book 1, but book 2 and book 3 are perfection. Book 2 is one of my favorite books of all time. Just like if I had to take one book out of the trilogy, it is perfection. Everything from the characters to the pacing to the writing, and that applies to the entire series as a whole. It just all works. It is also Middle Eastern and North African inspired, so it opens up our world to a very different part of the world that we don't typically get in fantasy. We are seeing more of it now, and I think Chakraborty is partially the reason why we're seeing more of it. She's shown a model by which we can have non-Western fantasy that feels incredibly rich and real and just as beautiful as any other type of fantasy. I love it. I can't wait to reread it at some point, and I really hope Chakraborty comes back to this world at some point in the future. It is exquisite, and you must read it if you have not read it. The books are also like crack. Like you just can read them so quickly. They are addictive. It's just incredible. Next up, we have a series that I read at the tail end of last year, and it's a Quartet, and that is a series I've not actually talked about in my channel yet. I'm going to film my review soon. I've just been doing some prep for it recently, and that is a sci-fi series, or a sci-fi. It's kind of like a bridge between sci-fi and fantasy, I would say, and that is The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. I had no idea what to expect going into this series, but this is a series that changed my perception on what good writing is. It is a series for people who truly love reading. It is almost like a love letter to readers. There are so many layers in these books. It is insane. I had to read other books and articles to fully understand, and even then I still don't fully understand the scope of what Wolfe is trying to achieve in these books. It is truly remarkable. I cannot point to another author, even one of the authors that I'm going to talk about later on, who could maybe compare, but I don't even think he remotely compares in truth to the amount of scale and complexity and nuance that is built into this world. It is remarkable, like really, truly remarkable. There are references to Proust, there are references to Dickens, there are references to Shakespeare. It's just, there are references to so many other authors, and it's captured in a way that it just feels very magical. And oh my gosh, I just can't rave about the series enough. It's just really something. Like, it really is something. And I read the 4 books pretty much in quick succession, and I'm going to do a reread of it, because this is the sort of series that upon a reread you will pick up more and more from it, more and more little nuggets that Wolfe has just laid out for us. for us readers to pick up on. He also uses multiple mechanisms and techniques to tell the story. He uses poetry, he uses plays, he just has stories within stories within stories, and it is really, really quite something. It's quite unique. I've not really seen many authors do that before. There's only one other that maybe comes to mind. But I mean, he did it in a standalone, not to the scale of doing a quartet. And then there's also other books in this world. Like, it's really incredible. The character work is fantastic. The world building is amazing. The philosophical undertones are beautifully captured and realized. And this is just one of those series that I think as you read it, it's just going to be the gift that keeps on giving. Chef's kiss, perfect. Cannot really criticize anything about it. Next up, that brings me onto the one author that I could maybe potentially mention in the same vein as Wolf, and that is The Second Apocalypse by R. Scott Baker. The Second Apocalypse consists of 7 books over the Prince of Nothing trilogy and then the Aspect Emperor Quartet, and it's just incredible. It is still to this day, even more so than Wolf, I would say it's denser than Wolf, probably for slightly different reasons. I mean, Wolf is still very dense, but in a different way. I think Baker's just dense because there's so much philosophy packed into these books that every sentence, every paragraph, every chapter has, again, layers and layers and layers within it, that one reread is not going to suffice in order to be able to capture the true scale and scope that he's built into this world. It is phenomenal. It is absolutely phenomenal. These books are about war, the impact of war on the average person. They are violent, they do not hold back, and they really explore the concepts of like destiny, the concept of being able to stray from one's own path, which is something that I genuinely think about a lot. I think about the whole concept of like predestination, really interesting personally. And there's a lot of like religious thematic work built into this world that I just absolutely love. It reads like a philosophical, historical, fantasy epic that I think no author or very, very few authors have been able to achieve that level of depth and scale as well as Baker does. Obviously, there's people like Erikson, but I haven't read Erikson yet. George R.R. Martin, to some extent, you could put into that bucket, though don't know if his works are necessarily as philosophical. Wolf is obviously one, but much more on the sci-fi end. Like, there's definitely people that I think you'd be able to compare him to, but I just haven't necessarily read those other authors, except for Wolf, of course. It's just phenomenal, guys. Like, the characters are incredible. There are no good people in this world, and I like that. I like morally grey characters because I do truly believe that every human being is morally grey. It's just whether you're going to be more on the good side or more on the bad side. But we're all on that scale. I also really like the exploration of like religion versus magic. I also really like the exploration of like finding one's purpose, but like at what cost does one have to go to find that purpose? Like, there's just so many things packed into this series. There's also a lot of stuff around like family dynamics and relationships, and also things around revenge, justice, freedom. Like, there's just so much. Like, honestly, I'm not even scraping the surface. It's ridiculous. Go check out my individual reviews of these books because they are phenomenal. Like, they are absolutely phenomenal. They're not the easiest books to read, but damn is it rewarding to read them. Incredible. They're very cinematic as well. Next up, we have, this is not going to be a surprise to anybody. We have the First Law Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I mean, I would just say the First Law world as a totality. But if I had to pick like one part of his world, I'd definitely pick the original trilogy because it's just perfection. From the character work, these are very character-driven books that really make you love people who are really bad people. Again, like you'll see a very common theme amongst all the books, amongst all the series that I picked. Every single series has morally grey characters to some extent. I think the one that has that the least is probably Daveofad, but all the other series have morally grey characters, and they don't show absolute good or absolute evil. It's about people in the middle who do good things and do bad things and can kind of flip between those things at any point in time. And I think the thing that everybody will talk about with this series is the character work, whether it's Logan, Glocta, Jezzel, Baez, whoever it may be. It just has this incredibly rich cast of characters. Even the secondary cast of characters and the tertiary set of characters all have depth, all have a point. And that's so hard to do in a world as big as this if we're factoring the whole entire First Law world. It is a series that I will love both on an emotional level but also on a technical writing level. I think technically these books are so well written. Some people will complain about them being a slow burn. I personally like that, but that's just personal preference. But these books are just an absolute masterclass in how to write realistic, relatable, funny, interesting characters. And that is what I want from my books. My voice is going because I've been talking quite a bit, but I've been filming quite a few videos today. But it's just absolutely incredible. First Law, without a doubt, will always have in particular a very special place in my heart, because those characters are characters that live with me every single day. Logan, to this day, is still my favourite character of all time, just because there's something about him that Joe Abercrombie was able to capture that I've not really been able to see in another character since I read First Law. There's maybe one character in the Second Apocalypse series by Baker called Nair, who's also an incredible character, but they're very different in many ways, but they also have some similarities. But I think if I had to pick one, it'd have to be Logan every single time, just because I do think Logan is a good person. I think his circumstances have unfortunately led him down a dark path, and I think that's made him into a person that maybe he doesn't like being, and I love that sort of character. It's my favourite type of character. So First Law also obviously has to be on this list. And then in final place, and again these aren't ranked, so don't take this as being like my least favourite or anything like that. It just happens to be the last one that I wrote on the list, and that is The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. This series is so unique. I've never really read anything quite like it. It's one of those series that is best read in quick succession to really appreciate, I think, the scope of this world. And I think, again, the character development is absolutely phenomenal in this series. Again, we don't have characters who are straight up good or straight up bad. They're morally grey. They have to make hard decisions. They have to do things that are hard and that are not easy on a lot of people, and that unfortunately result in a lot of collateral damage. But our characters are still very well developed, very well realised, and even though you might not necessarily agree with the decisions that they make, you do understand why they make them, and you do understand and see the consequences of those decisions that they have on them as individuals, which is something that I love seeing. The world is also incredible. Like, I think it's like East Asian inspired, and you definitely get that from the vibe. It's one of those stories that I think, again, as you reread it more and more, you'll unpack things that you maybe missed on a first reread, which is why all of these series on this list are a series that I'm going to reread at some point. But Daniel Abraham also has quite a poetic writing style. It's quite dense, but it's not in a negative way. I think it's one of those books where, like, I read only like one chapter, maybe 2 chapters a day, because there's so much packed into each chapter that you kind of need to take it one chapter at a time. And I would say that also applies to Baker and to Wolf as well. Like, I think when you have dense writing, you need to read it a bit, at least for me, I need to read it a bit slower so I can fully ingest what's happening. And even then I won't fully ingest it. I will just get kind of fragments that maybe I would have missed if I'd rushed through it. But I think with this book, because there's also so much happening in different parts of the world, it's best read in a way that where you can kind of easily digest the stakes and where each character is in their individual journey, as well as where the kind of world is at as a whole, if that makes sense. There's a lot of exploration around like war, also around like destiny, finding your place, also about kind of what makes good leaders, what makes good rulers, which is something that I love in my books. It's also very, very political in nature, which I also love in my books. It's just absolutely fantastic. There is nothing that I would change about this series. Again, it's a slow burn. I think a lot of people potentially would dislike it for that reason, but it needs to happen because the world really builds on itself and the characters really build on themselves in each book, so that when we hit the last book and we realise what happens at the end and the consequences of everything, it really hits us in the gut. And I really appreciate that from Daniel Abraham. So all of these series, they're all incredible in their own ways. You'll notice a lot of commonalities in the things that I personally love in my books. I think if I had to say like what was the odd one out, Daveofad is probably the odd one out in the sense that it's not dense at all. I would say it's equally plot driven as it is character driven, and it's just a lot easier to read and get through. Like I think I read through that series in like a week or two, or like 10 days. Whereas I think the rest of these books, maybe bar First Law, because I was just addicted to that book, the rest take quite a while to get through, and I think that's just because the scale of what they're trying to achieve is naturally just quite a lot bigger than the average fantasy series. Every single one of these series has a special place in my heart. Every single one of these series is a series that I'm sure I'm going to talk about again in the future. And if you have any recommendations of series that I would say are more hidden gems, because I know of all the obvious ones like Robin Hobb and Erickson and, you know, Christopher Verruccio, you know, there's a lot of series that I have on my radar that kind of could potentially be on this list. But I'm always looking for more hidden gems, more things that people don't really talk about. As an example, I don't really hear anybody talking about Baker, Abraham, or Wolfe. And Chakraborty, at least in the circles that I have been in the past, very few people really talked about her. First of all, I would say is probably the most mainstream on this list. But again, I think that's also just because Grimdark has been getting a lot more popularity. So yeah, if there's any particularly hidden gems or series that have really resonated with you in the same way that these have resonated with me, definitely let me know down below. If you've read any of these series, also do let me down below and what you liked about them or even disliked about them. But I honestly think if you read one of these series, you could not go wrong, because all of these series stand the test of time. They're all very layered. They all have incredible characters, beautiful world building, and they're not just about, you know, fighting bad people. It's not about just fighting the bad enemy. It's about fighting the inner demons that we all have in ourselves, whilst also fighting the bigger things that threaten our societies. So love all of them, and if this spurs you on to read one of these, then I consider that a success personally. So let me know down below what you think, and let me know down below if you have any recs or any favourites that you want to talk about. I'd love to continue the discussion there. Otherwise, I will see you in my next video. Stay safe as always, take care, and I will see you very soon. Thanks folks, bye.